front of you, and that's just the way of life. You know, the questions about what matters in your church budget seem a little different than when you're in Macon, Georgia, or Seattle, Washington. Why don't you say this? None of us can be alone, and all of us need to have the voice of the larger church speaking into us, and that is demonstrated here. Absolutely. Peter, come and help us. And why Peter? It's not just that Peter was a fellow believer or that he came from another church. What's it about Peter? Because they knew that Peter had been in the company of Jesus. This is the qualifier.
Yes.
This is the qualifier for all intervening voice.
That's good.
Have you been in the company of Jesus? I grew up in a church, and this was rampant in the Church of God, where you had a church council, or coordinating council, or a board of trustees, and the people got on it were the people who succeeded in life. You know, the banker, the attorney, the property owner. Those are the people that just kind of rose to the surface. That's part of the human dynamic. And I remember as I became a young pastor, I knew some of those people, and they were good folk. But it occurred to me once, if I had a brain tumor, would I be asking them to pray for me? The person that wanted to pray for me didn't graduate from high school, but I knew that man had power with God.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me, why isn't that man sitting at the table leading the church? Because the qualifier is not how the world has measured your success or what you've been able to achieve materially. The qualifier is, am I persuaded that you know Jesus personally in such a way that you can move him to get things done? That's who I want. We rewrote the whole thing. So that spiritual qualifications, as outlined in the New Testament, become the driver of who sits at the table of the church council. Who are the elders? It's not about who your father was, or who your mother was, or where you grew up, or where you went to school. I have a degree in political science from Seattle State University. I went on to the University of Washington Law School. I represented Seattle, Northwest Seattle, in the House of Representatives, in the state legislature in Olympia. I worked for Northwest Airlines in the management training program that gave me the keys to the world. But none of that is relevant if I do not know Jesus. Peter knew Jesus. Come and help us. So he gets there, and what does he see? He sees a church that's sick. It's sick. And it's got some symptoms of the sickness. And what are they? The first thing is the church he finds in Joppa, this once great engine of faith, is preoccupied with the useless rehearsal of the past. Why am I saying that? Well, look what happens. He walks in, and what are they doing? They're all showing him all the things. This is what Dorcas used to do. Look at what Dorcas used to do. How the days were when Dorcas was alive. Our problem is that Dorcas isn't here anymore. If only it could be as it used to be. If only the old days could be restored. How do we get back to the old days? The question was completely wrong. This is a symptom of sickness in the church. The question is never about how do you restore the old. It's how do you reach for the new. I am the one, behold, Jesus said, that makes all things new. New is about new, not old.
My Lord. My Lord.
And the church of God has somehow fallen into the cave of trying to find the old, and it lost sight of the new. When the movement began, it was all about the new. It was a fresh cutting edge of gospel witness. And too long have we longed for what once was. Earl Strady, who's so long been the historian of the Church of God, wrote a very interesting piece 2 years ago when the Church of God convention, which had historically been held in Anderson since 1906, was moved to Oklahoma City. Oh, my goodness. You'd think that Iran had already launched its nuclear weapon. By the measure of some, the movement was being destroyed. And I don't mean to diminish those who suffered loss. I live in Anderson. I've lived there for a quarter century. I understand it. I'm tied to the campground, too. I grew up in a different campground in Edmonds, Washington. Tall Timber Camp, established in 1917. My grandmother was on the cabin there. My earliest memories as a child was going out to the Tall Timber Camp. The plant was 45 acres with a beach of Puget Sound. And the tall timber trees, the evergreen fresh scent, and the salt air of Puget Sound mixing along the way. And all my cousins, and all my friends, and my grandparents, and my aunts and uncles, and the kids that followed us, and my children raised up the same way. I mean, I understand that whole history. I lived it. It formed me. It fashioned me. But you know what? The Tall Timber Camp doesn't exist anymore because the city of Edmonds grew and forced the camp to join the public utilities. The church didn't feel like it wanted to pay the bill, so it sold the whole thing. My goodness, boy, in those days I was just a kid then, but I remember the arguments and the debates and the pastors and the elders and my dad all at the table pounding their fists. The church is going to die. The world's going to end. Jesus coming back. We will have squandered the whole. Oh, but guess what? The gospel's still proclaimed. Washington State, which then was just a blip on the Church of God radar, is now one of our 10 largest states in terms of number of people in Church of God. We have 3 of our 30 largest churches are in Washington State. In those days, none of our churches even registered on the radar. I'm not saying that so in campground help that grow. I'm just saying sometimes we connect dots that aren't even there. And you can't go back. I go back to Edmonds now, and the campground is a bunch of really expensive homes overlooking Puget Sound. It's never going to be back. So what do? I reach for the new.
Yes.
What's coming next?
What's coming next?
And actually, people aren't going to camp meeting that much anymore. The reason the meeting was moved from Anderson to Oklahoma City was people stopped coming.
Yeah.
In 2012, 1,402 people came. In 1991, 10,000 people came. Figure it out. Do the math. Less than 100 people staying in the dorms. Less than 40 people engaged in the campsites. And there are less than 200 hotel rooms in the whole town within 20 miles of the place. And then go on and on. There's no airport. You can't take a plane there. You can't take a train there. You can't take a bus there. But we want to have an international meeting that unites the world. Oh, that doesn't make any sense. You know, once Anderson was a living, dynamic city with train stops and all kinds of stuff, and all roads led there. General Motors employed 25,000 people the day I came there as a pastor. Today they don't own one employee. They don't have one footprint. There's nothing there.
Nothing's there.
Oh, I know, but the Church of God has to preserve its history. Let the world go to hell in a handbasket. Let people stop coming. Let the whole thing dry up. But our tradition will be preserved. That is out of this world. And it's not in heaven's scheme. Jesus did not die for the Anderson camp meeting.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
I'm only illustrating how that's just one story that we can replicate over and over. You can't hold on to the past. The past is important, and it informs our future. And I love history. And if you think I can go toe-to-toe with you on the Church of God hymnal, I could go toe-to-toe to you on history. You want to talk about American history, world history? You want to talk about international history? I love that. Sports, not so much. You'll leave me behind when you talk about the baseball teams. I don't get it. Boring. But for me, history, it teaches so much. But if a church is preoccupied with its history, if its history becomes the lens alone by which it sees its future, it will become a denomination just like those we left behind.
That's right.
Because they're about their history.
History, not the future.
We must not become what we said we despised. And yet we have. Just change something up. Just be that voice to change something and see what happens. Because you see, change always requires leaving behind some history.
Yes.
Now I'm just going to give you a personal example. I have 4 sons. I have 4 grandchildren. I have 2 granddaughters. They're adorable. I mean, and my wife is all about these granddaughters because she wanted a little girl so bad. And if we'd had one, if our second child had been a girl, we might have had 4 boys. But that's another story. I think if the 4 boys, she'd throw her hands up too. Anyway, so I digress. So I have these 4 boys. I mean, these 2 little granddaughters, and I've seen more pink in the last 5 years with those girls than I've seen in the preceding 30 years. So my wife's all about that. And I love those girls. But then my son, my oldest, that's my second son, has these 2 girls. My oldest son, who got married second, not first, but anyway, now he has 2 little boys. And those boys, Mason and Lance, when I'm with them, my oldest son's name is Jacob. I mean, they are the spitting image of Jacob Lyon. And when I hold those boys, now 5 and 2, when I hold them in my arms, I am 30 years old again. Oh man, I love those boys. I love them. I'm sure they have personalities of their own, but that doesn't really matter. It's about what I'm experiencing and reliving my past. You get that. Any grandparent in this room knows that. And today, my youngest son, Nathaniel, is delivering a boy. His wife was being induced last night. The baby's still not here in Dayton, Ohio. That baby's going to be born. A little boy named Ezra John. We can't wait to meet him. But I know when I see little Ezra, I'm going to see my boy Nathaniel, who was the most adorable thing. He was so perfect. He's still perfect. The pastor in Ohio.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I long for those days when I could just gather my kids up and hold in my arms. And I just wish that could be stopped. What can I do? What can I do? But when I get into that groove, you know what happens? My world stops. Because I'm an aging guy. we better start thinking about what I'm going to do and who's going to hold me in a few years. You get it? Because if all I do is dream about holding that baby, I'm going to be on a curb. My parents are still living. The ones who adopted me and gave me a name and gave me a life to whom I owe my life. My mother's 94. My dad has Alzheimer's. They're in a little apartment in a senior community. I had to move out of their house last year, and I'm taking care of them. I'm an only child. All that. My son Peter, my second son, he says to me a couple weeks ago, he says, Dad, what? Peter's very just kind of flat affect. Dad, what's that? I'm watching how you take care of your parents. Oh. Because what he's saying is, I'm taking my cues of how I'm going to treat you by how you're treating them. And so I like my game. I'll tell you what. Whatever my parents want, they do. But I have to look forward. The church has to look forward. If all you're dreaming about is last year's camp meeting, you are dead in the water. And this church in Joppa is all looking backward. It's suffered loss. Things aren't as they were. The world has moved on. Events beyond their control have intervened, and they are stopped in their tracks just like churches can be. First symptom. Second symptom. They're wholly preoccupied with material things. Why do I say that? Well, because their link to the past is about all those coats and stuff that Dorcas made. It's like, feel the fabric of this, Mr. Peter. Look at the fine hem. Look at the way it was. Look how she did so skillfully these clothes that the poor needed. The widows and orphans are there. What are we going to do without her? Look how she made for us. Look at these things. Where are we going to get things now? How will we be clothed now? The preoccupation with material things is always the symptom of the church's death.
My Lord, my Lord.
He who said, foxes have holes, and birds in the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. That's the guy we're following. He's the subject. Where did we get our preservation of things? Merle, as he was talking about the camp meeting and all its changes, I was referring to his historian, he said, when this movement began, it was a tabernacle people. The Gospel Trumpet Company, which was our origin, started in a house in northern Indiana. And then it grew, and they went to Grand Junction, Michigan. There's a campground, actually, near Grand Junction called Warner Memorial Camp. It's where D.S. Warner lived. He went out and saw that land where the Gospel Trumpet Company went in 1891 to Grand Junction. He went out on a horseback ride with one other guy, the two of them, and they came upon a lake and out in the woods. It's about 5 miles out of town. Grand Junction was called Grand Junction because it was a train junction. Trains from all over the Great Lakes were converging there, so it was a hub. And they went 5 miles out of this forest, a piece of land. He loved it. He stood on it. He said, God has called this land to be for the saints, and it's going to be the place where the church is united and made one. He built a house there and lived there. And he would travel around the country, but he always went home there. And that's where the camp meeting was. In 1895, in October that year, he had a big meeting there, and people were coming from all over. He believed that that's where the saints would be reunited, and sect Babylon would actually finally at once be vanquished, and the Lord would return. He started preaching about the end of time. He actually gave a year. We don't talk about this much, but he actually predicted that the world would end in 1941. That was in 1895. And he thought, and so did the believers with him then, they thought that's enough time for this whole sect Babylon to be taken down because there was so much energy and tension in the room. And 8 weeks later, he was dead. Age 52. No one knows what he died of. They think it was pneumonia, but because they didn't believe the doctors, we don't really know. Right. But he got sick one day, and 4 days later, he was dead in his house on that ground. And he's buried there. If you want to see Warner's grave, you go there to that ground. Oh, but that campground is a shadow of what once was. And still got people have houses there, and they're still trying to keep them alive, but you know what? People aren't driving to Warner Camp much anymore. And Grand Junction kind of folded up. The train stopped running, and so they moved the Gospel Trumpet Company after a few years, and they went to Moundsville, West Virginia. And they were there for a few years, but then guess what? Anderson, Indiana said, if you'll come to our town, if you have more than 50 employees of any kind, we don't care what your business is, you've got 50 employees, we'll give you free natural gas, because we've got plenty of it. And we want to compete with Indianapolis and Detroit to be the economic engine of the Midwest. So, you know what, you relocate here, and the Gospel Trumpet Company said, we're there. What I'm telling you is, in the first 26 years of the movement, the convention was held every year at a different location in 5 different states. The Gospel Trumpet Company moved over 4 or 5 times. It had no allegiance to an address. It had no allegiance to anything, except it was going to change the world. Did you hear that? It was going to change the world. And it was a tabernacle people. And then we got to Anderson, and somehow, according to Merle's shorthand, we became a temple people. There's a difference, isn't there? Yeah. When you're a temple people, what becomes the preoccupation? Keeping the temple up. Not folding up the tent, but keeping the temple up. Yeah. And you see, the Church of God became preoccupied in many ways with the material. It's about the temple. It's about the grounds. It's about the dome. I live in an office building that Hosea toured with us in the Missions Council meeting this week. That means eye-popping. When you go through all of its nooks and crannies, this Gospel Trumpet building where I have an office, and I always thought that my office and the people that worked with me was the sum of the building, but actually it's a tiny proportion. It's less than 10% of the square footage of that building is occupied. But we're keeping it because it's the history. Of course, when people are calling me and asking for help around the world, we have immigrants on our door at the church in Athens where they have 5,000 immigrants a day fleeing Syria and Iraq and all the chaos in the Middle East. They're landing in these islands, the Greek islands. They're boated by the Greek government into Athens, and they're just thrown on the streets. And our Church of God in Athens is in the middle of where they get off the boat. And they're lining up. And they are desperate. Some of them are Christians, some of them are Muslim, but they're all desperate, broken, widows and orphans in desperate, hopeless, helpless need. Can you help us? No, I have to take care of the building in Anderson, Indiana, because that's our history. And you have to wonder, what does Jesus think, peering over the edge of heaven? About the pure religion of the people he called to be one and holy, helping the widows and orphans with kindness. They're hard questions, aren't they? Yeah. But a church that's preoccupied with the preservation and protection of material things is on its way to die. I love Seattle. Actually, I'm an Irish citizen by birth. The reason I was named Michael Jordan is because I'm from Ireland. My father was a member of the Irish Republican Army, imprisoned by the British at the Crumlin jail in Belfast because of his part in what he described as the resistance, the effort to remove all British government from the island of Ireland. Right now, Northern Ireland still 6 counties under British rule. I'm just saying that my parents were not married. My birth mother from the west of Ireland, who speaks the Irish language as her first language, hardly speaks English. And it's a very foreign tongue. There's a lot of drama with all that. But I was raised up in Seattle, and that's my memory. And that, I loved it. I loved the sound, the Puget Sound, the arm of the ocean, the fascinating sea sparkling with islands like diamonds, and the mountains on either side. And to see the sunset in the west behind the Olympic Mountains, a jagged crest of mountains that rise dramatically from sea level and pierce the sky, and to see that pink sunset, and then the water of Puget Sound on its feet between me and the mountains, and the sun going down on the Pacific on the other side, and the way the water turns incandescent blue, and the fresh scent of evergreen every night wafts up and mixes with the salt air, the giant rhododendrons in blue that became like monsters in the fog of the morning, but always broke through in their great beauty when the sun burned the fog off each morning as I walked to school on Sunset Hill, overlooking Shell Bay on Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. And the fresh fishing ships, the fresh North Pacific cod that comes out of the water the same day, goes to spud fishing ships, is deep fried and battered, and then wrapped up in newspaper with French fries. I promise you, Long John Silver's in Amsterdam, it's got nothing. It's not even the same language. And the salmon that's fresh, succulent, so bright. The berries and the apples and the apricots and the oranges. More fruit produced in Washington State than any other fruit in any other state in the country except California. I go on and on. And when God called me to leave that place at the age of 39, where I had known nothing else than to go to Anderson, Indiana, I said, I'm not moving to that cornfield. I'm not doing it. I don't know anyone there. The land is completely flat. There's no ocean. There are no evergreen trees. There's no sunset behind the Olympics. And there's no fish and chips. I'm not doing that. And the Lord had me by the nape of the neck for a long time. And he said, I'm calling you to do that. I'm calling you to that. I just resisted. God, please. I thought I would live in Seattle my whole life. I was going to change Seattle. I'm going to do it for the gospel. I'm serving you. I'm a good guy. Just let things work out according to my plan.
My plan. My Lord. My plan.
And finally, when I surrendered after a long train of events that I could preach sermons on supernatural interventions of God walking in my face and telling me if I did not move to Indiana, I'd be disobedient. After all of that, I finally surrendered. And on the last night that I lived in Seattle as a place I could call then home legitimately, on August 4th, 1991, I took my wife and my 4 little boys and put them to sleep in my mother-in-law's house where we were spending our last night. And at 2 a.m., I went back to the Fairview Church building where I had poured my whole life into it. My grandparents had helped the whole thing get started. On and on. Everything I ever known was centered there. And I walked in the building and I went to my office and I took the keys and I put them on my desk and the office door closed as I walked into the hallway, and when it closed, it locked, and that was the moment I knew I couldn't go back. And then I walked in the big grand hallway, and there's a huge staircase at the front of the church inside, and when you come down that staircase, there are these huge portraits, oil paintings, life-size. 2 men, one on either side. One, Lord Tiffany Flint, elder statesman of the church, first graduating class of the Anderson Bible Training School of 1917 on this wall. On this wall, Johnny Worthen, my grandfather, my mother's father, pillar of the church, who always passed out lifesavers to the kids every Sunday. And upon his passing, the church had a portrait done because he was always at the front door making people feel welcome. And there it was, and I sat on those steps, and I looked at that picture of my grandpa, and I began to cry. I said, Lord, I cannot do this. I cannot walk away from this property. I cannot walk away from this. It's all I've ever known. I've poured my whole life into it. This building, the walls, the woodwork, everything about it lives and breathes to me life and history and who I am and my identity. I can't let it go. I can't do it. And God spoke to me. I believe God speaks.
Yes.
You can say I'm out of my mind, but God spoke to me and he said, Jim, never hold on to anything so tightly that you disobey me.
That's good.
Even if you were to live in Seattle all of your life, which was my dream, you're still just passing through. Whoa. This is not my home. I'm a stranger and alien in this land. I am working to a heavenly home. I'm an ambassador for Christ, a foreign visitor in a world that is not my own. Where did we get off holding on to property and dirt and buildings and addresses as if that somehow was righteous? It's not.
Right, brother.
And it encumbers the movement of God's people to reach for the future and to do the miraculous things He wants to get done. We're here not to build churches, and we're not here to build campgrounds, and we're not here to build schools. We're here to change the world. Now, if any of those things will change the world, do it. But if it's not changing the world, let it go. And I had to walk out of that building, and I was trembling. And when I got up, hearing those words from God, tears streaming down my face at 2:30 a.m. on that Sunday morning, the door closed behind me, and I stood outside the building and could not go back in. And I, in a way I never dreamed, for the first time in my life, I was a free man.
Praise the Lord.
Because from that minute, I have not held on to anything. And you know what? 4 years ago, I got a call at the church where I was pastoring, and I was doing a Bible study. It was Wednesday night, and I was there minding my own business, and somebody ran in and said, Jim, you've got to go home. What? Something's the matter. We don't know, but something's the matter at your house. You've got to go home. Your wife is called. She's hysterical. Get home. One of my boys was coming down the hallway. Mom, Dad, you have to get home. We don't know. She called us. She was so hysterical. We thought you had died. We don't know what's going on, but we got to get home. I got in my car, just walked out, and I was driving down Range Line, and trying to get there to my house, and I turned the corner of my street. I couldn't live out in the country, and there are a few other houses, but I mean, it's not like a neighborhood. I turned the street, and there's all these flashing lights, and I run up to my house, and there are 4 companies of fire trucks there, and my wife is standing outside shivering and weeping, hysterical, as our house is on fire. The whole house burned to the ground. We lost everything we've had, all of my children's school papers, all of our pictures, my mother's cookbook, my mother-in-law's cookbook, everything that was material in our lives. I had nothing but the clothes on my back. I didn't have a toothbrush. We had nothing. And had everything.
Praise the Lord.
I stood there with my wife huddled in my arms, weeping as you watch your whole life just gone, and you think, I can't go on. Oh, but no, wait a minute. I know I can go on. I left Seattle. to move here to this cornfield. You want a nail anyway. What are you holding on to it for? And you know what? We rebuilt the house. It's a lot cooler now than it used to be. Same footprint, but got new carpet, new colors. And you know what? I made a vow I would never fill up all those closets with stuff. And I look back and I think, boy, I would have had to have a garage sale to really job all that junk I had. It's all gone out. A lot easier than a garage sale. What I'm suggesting to you is maybe the Church of God needs to burn down. Because if it burned down, maybe we understand we still have everything. A church preoccupied with the past or material things is sick. But those are symptoms, aren't they?
Yes.
Dr. Peter, what is the real problem? What's the root of these symptoms? A completely inadequate faith. Why do I say that? Because when you hold on to the past and you hold on to things, it's because you don't have enough faith to go forward. That's the bottom line. See, when you have faith in the confident assurance of things unseen, that's about the future, isn't it? The unseen, I can't see yet. I can only dream of yet. Faith is about knowing that God is above me and beyond me, and He's real, and I can't necessarily materially hold on to it. But when I put my hands into His, when I understand that Jesus really is alive, and that we can actually replicate the Acts of the Apostles, that we actually could expect to see great works, when we understand that we can actually change the world, if the Roman Empire can be converted, what's the matter with our job? And faith is the issue. There's symptoms of a lack of faith. The church in Java wasn't trusting God to give them a new chapter after Dorcas had died. She's gone on to glory. She's with Jesus. Do you think that God is just going to abandon you and leave all the poor widows and orphans without help? You may not understand how it's going to work, but He's ahead of you. He's 2 steps ahead for the good. Do you think that this church has no future because you lost that person, that pastor? Oh, there'll never be another pastor as good as that one. Oh, we'll never have a building as nice as that one. We'll never have a Sunday night service like we used to. We'll never be able to have camp meeting like we used to. Do you think that somehow that's evidence that the church is in trouble? Or maybe it's evidence that God has new days and new things and new people and new ministries and new ways to do stuff.
Praise the Lord.
You see, faith is about believing and trusting that God never leaves you and has never left you in a lurch. And you may lose everything and still have everything if you have faith in Him. And if I don't have a house, I'll find a place to live. And you know what happened? That night, I had still then 2 sons living at home. My wife and I, we just stared at each other. It took 3 or 4 hours for them to extinguish the flames, and then there was just nothing but the charred altar remained of our house on that cold, damp November 30th night. And I thought, what am I going to do? I went to my parents' house. My father's, I told you, has Alzheimer's, and my dad knows us all and everything, but all of us in the house just made him a wild man. He couldn't take all the interruption of routine and stuff, and I knew this isn't going to work. And so we slept there that night, and the next morning I thought, what am I going to do? I don't know where I'm going. And guess what? We got a call. Do you know who called us? It's so amazing. Called my wife, didn't call me. On her cell phone. Gloria Gaither. Ever heard of her? Yes.